Like with a women's ERG, oftentimes it can come from the perspective of a white woman, because a lot of the time that's who leads the women's ERGs. And then when those ERGs are like, okay, well, we don't have that much engagement, it's because you're only doing things from that one lens. It doesn't make those ERG leaders bad. It just means that, okay, we just have to bring awareness to the other aspects of this community. Okay, and we are officially live. So my name is Maceo Owens. I am all things employer resource groups, so much so that I go by the ERG Homegirl here on LinkedIn. And I'm really excited with this series, as mentioned, to answer all of the burning questions within the ERG space.
What ERG structure would you recommend for an ERG program that needs revamping?
As we do these sessions more, I anticipate more people will show up, and then I can ask for more context. But it was a pre-submitted question, so I will answer it very generally. In that, when it comes to the structure of the ERG, I really like approaching it more so from a activity-based standpoint. And I know that doesn't really make sense when I say it, so let me just break it down. A lot of ERG programs have made the mistake of having a pillar-based model when it comes to the breakdown of their ERGs. So for instance, they might have someone over the workplace pillar, and that's an entire ERG lead role. For me, that's a mistake for a number of different reasons. Thing one, and this is actually what I've been saying recently, and I think it's been resonating with people, when it comes to setting up your ERG program, or even just like for ERG leaders, they're volunteers. So let's just imagine that you went to go and volunteer at the food shelter. When you get there, you would not expect that they would just say to you, yeah, go do this thing. Like, you're over distribution. Go do it. And then you're just expected to know what to do, how to do it, all these things. No. When they come in as volunteers, or when you come in as a volunteer, you will want step-by-step instructions on how to do X, Y, and Z thing. This way, okay, this is how I do it. This is how I know I'm successful. This is how I know what not to do. All of those things. So keep that in mind with what I'm about to say when it comes to this pillar-based breakdown, and why I prefer more of an activity-based breakdown. So again, if someone's over, like I said, the workplace pillar, question number one that ERG leaders would have is, well, what does that encompass? And honestly, that's a big problem that I don't think that we talk about enough, because even just stopping there, we have a lot of these pillars in place. Sometimes they're passed on from the DEI team directly, but that's a whole nother conversation. But anyway, we have these pillars in place, but most of the time, the ERG leaders don't know what that means, or they might fully try to take that and run with it. So with workplace, they might say, okay, that means that I'm over making this workplace more inclusive to the company or to this community, which in general sounds great, but there might be some barriers or some things that the company's not ready for when it comes to inclusion for this community. So let's just say it's a disability ERG, and now they're working on making the offices more disability friendly, but the offices might not have budget, the bandwidth, all the things to actually implement the things that the ERG leader is suggesting. So that's a perfect example of an ERG leader trying to execute on a role that they don't really understand what the purpose is, and then they hit a blocker, again, because it was never defined on what that was. Beyond that, let's just say that those roles were defined. What's the problem with having this pillar-based approach? Underneath each pillar, there's still some big things that would need to happen. This is where we segue into what activities are that exist within an ERG. I actually do an entire training on this, but in summary, there's only 3 ways, like really, for a member to engage in an ERG program. That's for them to attend an event, aka watch a recording, but just bear with me here. To attend an event, to participate in the communications channel, or to participate in some activity asynchronous on their own time. That would also include watching a recorded video. But nevertheless, those are the 3 ways that people can participate within an ERG. Now, that being said, if you just say things like workplace, where does that fall within those aspects of engagement? Because ultimately, we want people to participate in our ERG. Now you've segmented this ERG leader role outside of something that directly has to do with engagement. There's so many things there. And this exists beyond just workplace. There might be one called career. And now what does it mean when it comes to career, and what are the limitations? And beyond that, like I said, for a volunteer, you should have a step-by-step on for your volunteers on how they execute their job. So even if you don't have the bandwidth or even the answers to what does it mean for career or what does it mean for workplace, and you're really setting up ERG leaders for success. I kind of talked a little bit about bad practices, but focusing more so on the best practice when it comes to an ERG leader structure. So when it comes to the methods of engagement, which is events, communications, activities, this makes it so much easier for you to develop that SOP for best practices for that person. So now someone can truly feel like an expert when it comes to events in particular. And that can go across pillars. Let's just say, for instance, you have maybe like a pillar-based approach on what type of impact you want to see for the ERG, but you can do events now that hit on those different pillars. But really that person though who's over events can really be a specialist in events. And that takes a whole different skill set. And honestly, this is something more that I've seen ERG leaders want to lean into. For instance, with communications. I know I'm all over the place, and this is supposed to be a quick Q&A answer, but because the person isn't here who asked me the question, I just want to give extra context to it. But for instance, with a communications ERG leader role, that's something where you can specialize in community engagement, in driving community and building connections within your communications channel, whether that's Slack, whether it's Teams, whatever product you use that has that two-way street of communications with your community. That is a skill, and that is a skill that's actually transferable now to other departments. So if you're interested in marketing, or even me, I've seen someone who was interested in internal comms. Like, she was a support agent and she wanted to get into internal comms. And by her taking the communications ERG role, not only was she able to advocate for saying, okay, I actually know how to drive engagement from employees within a communications channel, but she was even able to advocate for a role within internal communications at a big company where she was heading that. So again, when you have these ERG leader roles based on skills, or even something that can be tied back to their interests or areas of development, it goes so much further than having it as a general pillar that's not baked out, that needs a lot of work when it comes to understanding what does it look like for this person to do this pillar successfully, step by step. I also just want to say, ERG leader, as someone who's been an ERG leader, I would say if you are an ERG leader, it's a lot to implement a structure by yourself. And truly, I would put the pressure on the ERG program manager or who's ever over the ERG program to implement this. I've seen this like strange trend where we're asking ERG leaders to do the work, which again, they're volunteers. Imagine again, you're going to volunteer at a food shelter and they're like, we need you to bake out this process. No, I just came here just to serve food. That's what I thought I was doing. And I think that's the case with ERG leaders and why they get burnt out, because we're asking so much of them where really it is just time in history for ERGs, fun fact, 59 years into ERGs, to actually do the work to set them up for success.
My organization just rolled out a new governance model where I am the commerce lead. How do I champion a new and better governance structure?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sorry to hear that you have moved over to that.
Not happy to see it.
Yeah, it hurts for me to hear when that happens, but it is happening because I understand the move to want to try to have more structure, and unfortunately that's just what's trending right now, but it's just not a best practice. So that being said, what advice would I give on how to help push change? Thing one, I would really lightly push back and really just ask, like, what does success for this role mean when it comes to that role? Or even when I say what does success mean, because sometimes you can be met with a general answer, even metrics wise, like what numbers would you have to see for you to know that I'm doing well within this volunteer role? But even when I give the illustration of volunteering at a food shelter, lately it's been hitting a lot with program managers like, oh, okay, I can now see why someone can get burnt out if this role doesn't make sense, if it's very generic. Even, and you mentioned that yours is, which one?
Commerce.
Oh. And like I said, because other programs are doing it, so they figure, okay, I don't really have to bake it out more because it's working somewhere. It's not working somewhere. It's just out there for the most part. And I say that respectfully to people who do follow any of those models. Not to say that your programs like a failure or anything. But I will say, on the side, I get a lot of ERG leaders reaching out. Look, I don't even get what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't feel like I'm impacting my community. Just the reasons why people get into this space, they're not being met with those pillar approaches. And it makes sense why you first joined under the communications pillar lead, because like you said, you're in marketing, so it's a natural fit. I would also say, I don't know, with the commerce one in particular, that one really just, it irks me, if I'm being honest. But especially with that one, I would give the pushback and ask, what does this mean when it comes to commerce? Because I've said this in posts before, but I think it really needs to be like said in a couple different things. Like, ERGs are under a cost center. For decades, ERGs were not expected to produce commerce like this. I know where it came from in 2020, and oftentimes, like, with the D&I teams that the ERGs sit under, they have to produce commerce to a certain degree. There's more of a need to justify that ROI. But with ERGs, that did not exist for decades, and this just came out of nowhere. So now commerce has just, it's honestly derailed ERGs oftentimes from the true purpose of why they exist and why they've existed for decades, which is really around the community and the people piece of it. So that's why I would double back on that in particular, and almost see like where the ERG falls when it comes to community. And even, it's just a fun exercise, and I have to figure out how to streamline this, but making it really easy to check out the ERG movement model, because it makes it very clear within that model, like, you shouldn't be worried about commerce driving if your community is suffering. Not saying that yours is, but oftentimes that community piece has room to grow within an ERG. But it's just so interesting to me, because no other employee engagement initiative is expected to drive commerce. Like I said, I know where it comes from, but it's just frustrating that it's happened to the ERG space, because this is like such a people-driven program. It's such a derailer for what ERGs can do. Quick rant, but yeah.
What best practices do you recommend around executive sponsor engagement?
So this is a fun one, because I'm developing new unpopular opinions as I'm really studying this. So when it comes to executive sponsors, of all people, I know the impact that a good executive sponsor can have. And that's because even me in my place today would not have happened if my executive sponsor, back when I was an ERG leader, at my first ERG, Black at DoorDash, if he did not advocate for me as an executive sponsor, I don't know where I would be. Honestly, quick TLDR for those of you who don't know my story. Just obviously being a Black ERG leader, like during Black Lives Matter movement, COVID, it was something. And as a support agent, so just like very entry level, I was that person who took on a lot of the burden, just because I was just so passionate. And sometimes our ERG leaders, they do this. They're so passionate that they're okay with burning out, with the caveat of, we're doing this for a community that we love. So I really respect the people who are those people within their ERG, but also I know how not sustainable that is at the same time. But I was that person. And even though I was doing so much, that's just for another day, I was doing so much, my manager just did not see the value of the work that I was doing, and it just didn't matter at the level that I was at. Definitely a lot of stuff happening there. Like I said, that's another conversation for another day. But with that, after I actually left DoorDash, my executive sponsor reached out that same day and was like, we have to get you back at DoorDash. And within the next month, I was back within my first salaried role. And honestly, I'm just like forever grateful for him as an executive sponsor. And he's just even continued to advocate for me even since. And yeah, so I understand the impact of executive sponsors. However, I think that ERGs have developed a strange relationship with their executive sponsors, and it's typically in one of two extreme ways. Extreme way number one, they have no relationship with their executive sponsor. They're just someone who, like, on paper is an executive sponsor, but they never really talk to them. They don't loop them into anything. So that's one extreme. And in many cases, the ERG is struggling not because their executive sponsor isn't engaging, but it's just another thing on top of the fact that the ERG is struggling and the executive sponsor isn't engaging. So that's one extreme. Other extreme in the other direction would be ERG leaders are so reliant on their executive sponsors. Thing one, they actually will go to their executive sponsors instead of the chain of command and going to their ERG program manager, almost to overrule whatever the ERG program manager says. So that's unfortunate that I see. Sometimes ERG leaders will also even ask their executive sponsor for budget, even though they already have a budget. Sometimes they will just say, we need more, and they go to the exec sponsor, which I really don't like as a best practice for so many different reasons. I'm really not a fan of ERG leaders asking executive sponsors for money if they already have a designated budget, because I am willing to bet that they're already not making the most of that designated budget. A lot of the times, ERG leaders will be like, look, we don't have enough money, but keep in mind they spent all their money on swag, or they donated it all. So there's probably a better way that you could have used it that actually drove engagement versus just giving it away. So that being said, when they typically go to their executive sponsor for this budget, it's not so that they can have a strategic usage. It's just because they just want to spend more money and they feel like X, Y, and Z amount is not enough. And if I had to give a number on what I see is like an average in the space right now, I would say $2,000 per ERG is like an average budget in the space right now. That might be high for some of you all, that might be low for some of you all, but that's honestly like on par with what I see lately. So I say all that to say, not a fan of going to the executive sponsor. Where was I going with that? Oh, yes. So when you go to the executive sponsor for budget, like I said, again, oftentimes if you have an ERG program manager or point of contact there, you're going around them to get something else to happen, where again, you should go through the chain of command there. So you don't have good communication clearly with your program manager, which is not a good look on the program manager, which a lot of ERG leaders don't realize is not a good look on the program. When you go beyond your program manager like that, it really makes the ERG program as a whole not look great. So many other reasons, but again, if we want ERGs to operate like a business and to just be functioning smoothly, it's important that we respect the chain of command there. Like I said, there's that toxic relationship that's existing where either you don't know your executive sponsor or you lean way too much on them and you don't really have a good relationship with the people that you, I don't want to say should prioritize, but maybe there should be a priority on the ERG program manager. Nevertheless, when it comes to executive sponsors, really the question was around like, how can we better leverage our executive sponsor? I say, as a bare minimum, if you're on that extreme where you don't know your executive sponsor that well, like they're just your exec sponsor on paper, I would say having, and hear me out here, having just that intro call. But on that intro call, you can ask them some questions to help get to know how they can best be your executive sponsor. I haven't actually posted about this yet, but this is something that I had a conversation on last week. And again, it was a business conversation. So you'll see how these business things apply to ERGs. But from a business standpoint, the question was, okay, we want to get people on our board. How do we determine who gets on our board? And for me, I would translate board members to executive sponsors from a business perspective. And with that, the company that I was speaking to, they just kept adding people to their board. And I was like, what's the point of having these people though? Are they on our board just to say that they're on our board? And then one of the people, they said, we can add them to the board, but each of them has like a specialty that they do. So this person can really help connect us. And then it pieced together for me. An executive sponsor does not have to be a catch-all for all things that an executive sponsor can do. However, I would say, understand what your exec sponsor's specialty is so that you know how best to leverage them. If they have a great network, that's how you best leverage them. But oftentimes we don't ask that question, which is funny because that's the same exact thing. Big hack when it comes to engagement is understanding even how your members want to be engaged as a member and then engaging them in the way that they say best applies. Same exact thing applies to your executive sponsor. So asking them like about themselves, having a real conversation, and even giving them some options on what does it look like to be an executive sponsor. Do you all need mentorship as an ERG leadership team? Or even to your ERG members, maybe having an opportunity for the exec sponsor to serve as a mentor. Do you need more connections internally? Maybe you want to bring some stuff to life, go to a conference. Or do you need more connections externally? You want to bring in speakers at a low cost. So there's different things that an executive sponsor can do, but you won't ever know what they will do until you understand what they can. Does that make sense? I don't know. I was trying to be like clever with that saying, but I don't know if it came together. But the point is, you're supposed to ask them, what they're interested in. This way you can give them opportunities that allow them to come through on what they're interested in.
What recommendations do you have around community building and collaboration within Microsoft Teams?
Yes, I love speaking on this because I think, and although I will say, I'm also a Slack girly, so I love Slack. I'm a Slack loyalist, so much so I'm literally in their early release community and everything. However, it's the same principles with Teams, and for the most part, Teams has all the same capabilities as Slack. Now, quick question with this. Is it Teams specifically, or is it Yammer, which I think is also like a Microsoft product?
We don't currently use Yammer, but I'm open to learning more about it.
Gotcha. The only benefit for Yammer for me is the analytics piece. So that's the one thing that like why I don't love Teams is Slack has really great analytics, and Yammer, even Facebook Workplace has those same set of analytics. With Teams, you cannot see like the amount of people who opened up your channel over the past 30 days like you can with Slack and with Yammer. So that makes it really hard to track success because the only thing that they give you is like number of posts and number of emoji reactions, which is okay. But if it's all the same person who's doing, that's not telling you anything about engagement. So that's the only thing with why I prefer Yammer over Teams. But Teams is, you can still do a lot with it. So I'll say in general, I love the fact that you're trying to get everyone on the same page because that's really big in the ERG space right now. Every ERG is doing their own thing, but getting them to really feel like a program is key. So I love that you're already on that. When it comes to, I think you were saying like best practices just around Teams. The reason why I like communications channels such as Teams and Slack is that it has space for two-way communications. It's not like a newsletter where you're just providing updates. And that's like the first and like main thing when it comes to these communications channels. I mean, there's obviously like the structural pieces, make sure that they're named the same way. So ERG dash, whatever the ERG is named. Basic things like that. But beyond that, when it comes to Teams, you don't just want them to become promotion centers. Essentially, that just feels like spam and like people will stop opening up your Teams channels. I like to say, and this actually comes up in my engagement workshop that I do, but I will give you the gems because I don't know, I'm feeling in the mood today to rant. When it comes to communications channels, there's different types of communications. So there's informational ones that's actually providing a resource to members, sharing a fun fact or a TED talk or telling them something that they didn't know that's relevant to their community. There's also engaging communications, like the communications that actually build community. So saying something fun, maybe a question of the day, maybe it's a TikTok that's funny, and you ask people, hey, can you relate? Just something around the fun aspect. And then there's the promotional ones, and that's really where you're telling people, like, hey, come join our next ERG event. Whenever there's low engagement within a Teams or Slack channel, it's because they're only doing promotional ones, and they're only saying, hey, we need you to do this or do that. It's important that you have a good balance with the types of communications that are happening within the channel. And the balance in this case is, I like to say for every 10 posts, only one of them should be one of those, hey, we have an event and that you should go to. Like you should really balance it out in that you're providing your members 10 times as much value as asking them to do something. And like I said, whenever there's low engagement within Slack, it's because you're only telling your members like, hey, go do this thing. My advice in general would be, as you implement these channels, especially if it's, and honestly, I would probably say make it like a big thing once they're up and make sure that the ERG leaders know like their role when it comes to the channel. So ideally someone's responsible for that channel, and that person as communications lead would create a communications calendar where they're able to balance out those types of comms, where they're able to actually write them out in advance and pre-schedule them within Teams. And that makes it so easy. Like, whenever I tell people that, they get a little bit nervous. Ooh, I'm giving them another thing. You can write out and schedule within an hour. And then as a communications lead, that's pretty much your role to do that. And that's it. You're good for the month other than engaging within that channel and like responding to what other people say. But it doesn't have to be super complicated when it comes to the engagement piece. But I think a lot of people resist having to think out what you're talking about and having to come up with what to post on the channel. But as long as all the ERGs are doing that, from there, like I said, in Teams, there's only so much that you can measure when it comes to the success. I really hate the fact that they don't tell you how many people posted or how many people used an emoji or how many people opened up your channel, because then That's really where the engagement is. It's not just how many posts is in there. However, you can still at least track that at least. But at least what I do, let's just say you did use Yammer. What I do with programs that I program manage is once a month, I'll just pull the metrics on what their engagement is. And the great thing about when you have those metrics, I won't even get into it too deep, but just know you can now have a percentage of their engagement. So you can say, hey, 25% of your ERG is engaged. How do we increase that number? And then you can actually compare across ERGs now. So even the big women's ERG, which is almost always the biggest one, now that big ERG can actually learn a lot from this small ERG because the small ERG knows how to better engage a larger percentage of their audience. And then providing those monthly updates and even just some best practices. Hey, over the past month, this is what I saw you all's ERGs do that did drive engagement. So now it's a way that you're able to actually boost their engagement by giving them ideas and inspiration on what's actually worked at your organization. And ERG leaders, they love, love, love that. It's like you give them the problem. Hey, we're at this number. We want to get to this number. Here's some best practices that we've seen ERGs here be successful with. Use this as you come up and you write your communications plan for the next month. It's honestly just been such a win. So that's what I would say. You can still do that last piece where you take screenshots of things that have worked within like ERGs and just give some shared learnings. But like I said, from the metrics point, you're limited in like really measuring true engagement.
This was helpful because we definitely do use our communications channel as a promotional tool. However, the 10-to-1 definitely sounds intimidating.
It always does. And really the 10-to-1 for context, I really recommend for ERG leaders when it comes to communications, posting 3 times a week in channel, which is 12 times a month. So this is not like 10-to-1 in a day. It's like over the course of a month, you should probably only have one thing that's telling people, hey, do this thing. And the rest should be, how are we building community within this communications channel?
What recommendations do you have around how an ERG can best recognize all of its intersectionalities?
And also, man, you are getting all the gems today because, like I said, this is also part of the engagement presentation. But I will just say, really, and this sounds very simple, but like having a list of all the aspects of your community, and it's never going to be all necessarily, but have, as an ERG leader, like list out like as many as possible. Because I think as ERG leaders, it's really easy to do things from our lens. Like me, I was a black ERG leader and I'm African American. So I was like, I'm trying to play spades. And that was me. But in general, that's not inclusive to the full ERG, the full black diaspora, which might not be familiar with spades. And those who are like Haitian or Nigerian, like I was doing things from my aspect of black. And it's very important as ERG leaders to literally take the time to list out what are all the aspects that exist within this community. And you can ask your community, but I'm not a big fan of that. It just feels a little sensitive sometimes, especially for specific communities. So I just say,
exactly.
Yeah. So, and yeah, it gets touchy doing it like that. And most people won't even share. So even just in general, when you list them out, and you force yourself to do programming on different aspects. Like you have to, as a team, be like, okay, we talked about this aspect this week or this month. Next month, we'll talk about this aspect. So this way you're forcing the diverse programming into it and you're not just doing things from that one lens. Because like I said, I was that person. I didn't do it on purpose, but that's just all I knew about the community. So I was like, I'm going to lean into that. You know, so it doesn't make us bad people, but I do think that inherently, like, it can feel like that sometimes from a member where it's, oh, for instance, and this comes up a lot, but like with a women's ERG, oftentimes it can come from the perspective of a white woman because a lot of the time that's who leads the women's ERGs, and it's not a bad thing, but it is the truth of, okay, we're not really diversifying our programming to speak on the experiences of women of color or even from women like from a different sexual background or whatever it may be, from like a neurodivergent standpoint, being a woman. It typically comes from white woman standpoint. And that's what it is in the space. Yeah. And again, that doesn't make those ERG leaders bad. It just means that, okay, we just have to bring awareness to the other aspects of this community so that we can do intentional programming. And then when those ERGs are like, okay, we don't have that much engagement, it's because you're only doing things from that one lens. So yeah, that was a long-winded answer, but hopefully it helped. And I do want to end this with saying, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. And if you haven't already, join the ERG Champs community. Like when I tell you all it's free and I'm doing this just because I need to see a change in the ERG space, because I'm really concerned about where we're at, but I'm also feeling optimistic via the ERG movement on what's coming. So, signing off, this is the ERG Homegirl, and I will catch you on the next one.